Welcome to the Irish NFL Show and to the second part of our pre-draft preview in association with our partners, the Aer Lingus College Football Classic and QuinnBet. We went from 32 to 21 last week. In just a moment, we'll be looking at the various scenarios for teams picking between 20th and 11th. That's from the Steelers to the Vikings, if it does turn out to be the Vikings, and we'll get into that very likely trade scenario shortly. And next week, then, we'll look at the top 10 in the lead up to the first night of the draft on April 25th. Just a reminder that there's still tickets available for this year's Aer Lingus College Football Classic. That's Saturday the 24th of August between Georgia Tech and Florida State. We'll be talking about some pretty keenly anticipated Florida State players, including Jared Verse, when we get into these picks, as we did last week. Those tickets, though, are selling out fast, so go to collegefootballireland.com and get them while you can to see the next crop of players who are likely to be in contention to get drafted by NFL teams in 2025. April 25th, of course, is just a week away, week from tonight on Thursday, the first night of the draft in Detroit. We will be going to Cork that night, the Irish NFL Show, heading on the road. We're going to be in the Old Oak Pub on Oliver Plunkett Street from 9 o'clock for a pre-draft meetup. Tickets are available through our social channels. You can check the link for Eventbrite and get your tickets there. That's €10, including entry to the draw, where you can win one of 2 NFL jerseys on the night. And we're really looking forward to meeting people down in the Old Oak ahead of the draft and chopping up some of what we've been talking about last week, this week, and indeed the top 10 for next week. Right, let's get into the draft itself. Our partners QuinnBet, by the way, are running some interesting draft betting markets. For instance, you can bet on the first player selected in each position. So the first quarterback, for instance, the first wide receiver, or the first edge rusher off the board. There's also a market on the first position drafted for each team. So that might be interesting, for instance, if you were of the view, as many people are, that the Chargers are going to trade down and the Vikings use the second first-round pick they've selected to trade up for a quarterback. So in that instance, you'd be betting that the Vikings will take a quarterback as their first pick off the board. QuinnBet will also be providing us with some enhanced prices on the Irish NFL Show in the lead-up to Thursday's draft. A reminder, as always, that that is for 18s only, and always gamble responsibly. Right, we'll get into the 20th pick in the draft, Shane, with the Steelers. So the mock drafts are saying, you know, as we did last week, we'll run you through some of the scenarios that some of the more prominent NFL media are working through, some of the draft experts out there. So CBS have Jackson Powers-Johnson, offensive lineman from Oregon, going to the Steelers. The Athletic, that's Dane Brugler, who did their latest mock draft, has them selecting Graham Barton, the center from Duke. PFF has them taking Olu Fashanu, again, another interior offensive lineman, Penn State. ESPN has them taking Graham Barton, again, center from Duke. And NFL, Peter Schrager, with their latest mock draft, NFL.com, has them taking Brian Thomas Jr., wide receiver from LSU, who's getting an awful lot of pop. Shane, we know that Steelers have revamped that quarterback room. We know, obviously, the defense was their old reliable last year, their old reliable selves, and pulled out many results from them, which seemed unlikely when they made their run to the playoffs. One of 3 teams to get to the playoffs from that division. You know, real battle for the AFC North there, and you know, looks like everybody else is tooled up too. So, what do you think the Steelers are going to do to keep up with that arms race? Because you don't want to let the Ravens get too far away. Bengals likely to have Joe Burrow back. Browns aren't going anywhere. They'll hope that Deshaun Watson recovers from that shoulder injury and goes one step further even than Joe Flacco managed last year.
Well, I think the key thing is the fact that they are obviously moving towards Russell Wilson, which brings in a very different style of play, which I think is why a lot of these analysts are probably suggesting that some form of offensive lineman comes in to that group. But I think that's a bit of a waste for a first-round pick. I mean, I think if we look at the stats last season, or even the way that the Steelers played last season, projecting the quarterback wasn't the problem. That wasn't the reason why the offense didn't get going. Kenny Pickett had plenty of time to move around. He just wasn't creative enough to do it, and he wasn't surrounded with the players who could make those key plays, those explosive decisions, those, I guess, get into enough space and separation. Now, part of that was down to the coaching, as has been, I guess, widely reported. But I think, like, even if you look at some of the stats from last season, the Steelers only allowed the average of just over 2 sacks a game in the top 10 of the NFL. The offensive line does not need a first rounder to come in and fix that, I don't think. If there is a hole, or they want to maybe, I guess, expand on their depth in that, they can very easily do that in the second, third, or fourth round. So I think that the Steelers are probably going to go for, and what I think is the smartest thing for them to do, is go for the best wide receiver that's still on the board. Peter Schrager has to have for Brian Thomas Jr. It could well be Romeo Odunze from Washington if he's still on the board that late into the draft for the 20th pick. But I think that finding creative players, finding the explosive talents, but also putting your trust into Russell Wilson and to a lesser extent Justin Fields, and saying, we're going to give you guys weapons and people to throw to and try to, I guess, diversify what the offense can do. Protection isn't the issue. The only reason I can see a benefit in going for a tougher offensive lineman is the fact that, of course, with Russell Wilson coming into that system, you're going to need to have your quarterback running plays, and that is going to make him a bit more vulnerable to injury. So it might make sense in that regard to bolster his protection. But I think that's something that can be done further down the draft. In the first round, if I was the Steelers, what makes sense is to pick the best wide receiver available.
Very interesting take there, Shane. Kieran, welcome to you again. Is that the Jeremy Shockey jersey you're rocking there?
That is a 2002 Giants road jersey, authentic collection. Yes, it sure is. One of my favorites from the U back in the day.
Excellent. It's fantastic to have a second Giants fan on this show, isn't it? Isn't it, Colin? I mean, you've stocked up with a Bears fan. It's only fair we bring in the Giants.
The stitching is unique. The craftsmanship is just exquisite.
No, it's really popping. It's good to see you bringing your A fashion game for the draft. As Shane was saying there, and like the consensus across the mock drafts is, and the Athletic did a nice job today breaking down the positional weaknesses for each team, looking into the analytics. And for the Steelers, they'd identified the offensive line and wide receiver as the two glaring gaps. As Shane said, you're not looking around at a huge amount of weapons that are necessarily going to help Russell Wilson. Like, yes, maybe the play calling was an issue early on last season, and ditching Matt Canada did seem to help the Steelers out a little bit. But you're picking at 20, so looks like unless a wide receiver like a Brian Thomas falls to you, that might not be an option. I have to say, I'd throw one out there and think if there was a good tight end available, if Brock Bowers happened to fall, you might be looking at that, but I suspect he's going to be snapped up elsewhere. Is that tallying with what you reckon, or do you think they'll go elsewhere?
No, that's exactly. I completely agree with what Shane has. I have Brian Thomas, wide receiver, LSU, going at 20 to the Steelers. I think for the Steelers, I mean, we remember last year the struggles they had in offense. They sputtered through the season. They had so many 3-point wins, 4-point wins. They've got to revamp the offense. I mean, Pickens was hit and miss. He was great for the highlight plays and the circus catches, but there was just too much inconsistency with the offense. The defense, I mean, they've lost a couple of people. They lost Peterson. They lost who else did they lose? Anyway, but adding Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, that's an offense that they're going to want to hit the ground running with, and I think they're going to go with Brian Thomas. He had 17 touchdowns last year with LSU. I mean, granted, it was LSU, and it was they were beating up on smaller teams like Mississippi State and stuff like that. But 17 touchdowns in a season is 17 touchdowns. He's your prototypical classic wide receiver, 6'3", 210 pounds. He's just a ball magnet. And I can see the Patriots taking him to address their glaring offense needs. Yes, like everybody else, they need O-line help, but they need a wide receiver one that can take some of the pressure away from Pickens.
Brian, I got to say, this is probably one of my favorite segments of the first round, because last week you're kind of looking for the value picks, and you're looking for who's gonna snag someone late in the first round that turns out to be a bit of a sleeper. Top 10 kind of takes care of itself, and we'll get to that next week. And there's a little bit of intrigue in terms of potential trades there, but this is kind of the money part of the draft for me. Like I love seeing this in the first round, because you really can get an absolute gem of a guy who just falls outside the top 10 but still near the top of your own positional chart. And I was looking back at the 2020 draft, another wide receiver heavy draft, and you were looking at the wide receivers who came off the board, and you could have had Brandon Ayuk in that draft. You could have had Justin Jefferson in that draft. You could have had CeeDee Lamb in that draft. But you could have also ended up with Jerry Jeudy or Jalen Reagor. And the Eagles infamously they traded that pick to the Vikings and ended up taking Reagor when they could have had Justin Jefferson. So, and what I also find fascinating, and sorry, I'll let you get in here in a moment without hogging the mic. What I also find fascinating is how, by this stage, a week out from the draft, people are talking themselves out of positions they had talked themselves into and going around full 180 on players. Like I heard somebody saying last week about Brian Thomas, well, on the one hand, he makes a lot of contested catches. And then I'm thinking, well, if he's making contested catches, maybe he's not getting separation. Like I've seen some of the tape on this guy, and he looks like, just as advertised, as Kieran said there, your prototypical wide receiver X.
Absolutely. We spoke last week about I suppose the nature of 21 to 32 and how reliant you are on other things that fall in your favor in terms of a player that you have on your board, and all the players will continue to jump off the GM's board. But this really is kind of, as you said, the money part. This is ultimately where these guys are fluctuating between 10 and between 11 and 20 that could potentially be top 10. And I think I have a feeling this could be a full house. I genuinely thought this would be my opening piece tonight, where everyone goes, seriously, Brian, where are you going with this? But I am on the wide receiver to bust as well, because Deontay Johnson was obviously moved on in free agency, and there's been so much talk over the course of the last week now, whether it's true or speculation from Brandon Ayuk potentially wanting out of San Francisco, and obviously the Steelers are one of the teams that get continuously linked with him. You wonder if they'll make that trade in advance of the Thursday night in the first round, and maybe they don't necessarily have to take a first pick on a wide receiver, because they may not even have that pick. But if they stay there, and you're mentioning some great players, but ultimately, like, who drops? Like, I know Shane mentioned Roman Dunze, but I think that's a bit of a stretch to see him fall to 20. I think if he gets past the Bears at 9, I think he'd be doing well. But certainly, bearing in mind, even though did a great podcast this week on the Bills with Matt Perino, and he spoke about the Bills potentially trying to move up ahead of the Steelers, because he recognized the Steelers as a team who are a serious player. And we're talking about Russell Wilson, but let's not forget they brought in Justin Fields. I still think that's a conversation itself come training camp, that's an open conversation. And maybe it'd be Justin Fields ultimately taking the snaps as opposed to Russell Wilson.
All right, very interesting. 19 is again another team I'm looking at going. It's fascinating to see what they're going to do. Shane, is the Rams. You know, this time last year when we were talking, we were saying, "Jesus, where are they going to go? This is going to be the ultimate test of Sean McVay's coaching career." Surprise, surprise, they make the playoff, and a big reason that they did so was that Les Snead hit on pretty much every guy that they've taken over the last 2 years. You'd Kyron Williams tearing it up at running back. Kobe Turner turns out to be a hit on the defensive side of the ball. Puka Nacua, almost inarguably the bargain of last year's draft, fourth round wide receiver, Pro Bowler. It's these things can go up and down, and a GM who lands home run after home run this year may strike out completely next year. And you know, we wait and see what the Rams will do, but they don't have nearly as much work to do as you might have thought that they would do. And you know, they're in a position now where, picking at 19, there's a couple of things potentially in play. And as we talked about, players who could go in the top 10 or could drop out here and might fall to them. One of the interesting ones, according to the mock drafts here, that really pops out to me is Laiatu Latu, the edge rusher UCLA guy, who athletically is an absolute phenomenon. You know, could have been a top rugby player, decided to commit to football. You know, he has that, you know, almost freakish kind of Polynesian athleticism, that mix of power and grace that seems to define, you know, their rugby players and the guys that travel over to the NFL. CBS have them taking maybe Byron Murphy, defensive lineman from Texas. The Athletics have them taking Jared Verse, edge rusher from Florida State. Yeah, shout out the Aer Lingus College Football Classic. Obviously, Florida State playing there on the 24th of August. And PFF have an interesting one. They have the Bills trading up, and this is to the point that Brian just made, if possible, to take Brian Thomas Jr., wide receiver from LSU, if he's still available. NFL.com, again, that was Peter Schrager's mock draft, have them taking Tyler Guyton, offensive tackle from Oklahoma. So no real consensus there. A little bit of a lean maybe towards them taking an edge rusher if they can get Latu or Verse at this stage. Kieran, I know you're a big fan of Jared Verse, but Shane, what do you think that the Rams are going to do?
Well, I think there's one team that's going to surprise us with something that's a bit left field, but something that will ultimately work is going to be the Rams. And I think that's a credit to the coaching there. I think you mentioned Laiatu Latu. I'd be surprised if he slips down that far. If he's there, I think it's an obvious hit, because obviously there's the Los Angeles Lynx. I think the Rams' biggest need right now is an edge rusher. And that's probably where they'd be looking at a hole they'd be looking to fix, if not in the draft and very early afterwards. So, you know, edge rusher to me seems like the most obvious, I guess the most obvious hole to hold the plug. But I was very interested in hearing what I guess the PFF view, and I was talking to Sam Monson from PFF in a podcast that we have going out in the morning, and he suggested again that the Bills will be the type of team that could be aggressive, that could move up, and the Rams are the kind of club that if they traded back and some part of their trade deal meant that they got more picks in the second and third round, you can trust those guys to use them in a positive way. So I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Rams trade out of the first round slot. They're one of the clubs that probably isn't as reliant on hitting here, but if they are gonna stick with it, I think an edge rusher is the player they need. Laiatu Latu, if he's there, Jared Verse again, if he's there, those are the areas that the Rams need to really hit on.
Well, we know Kieran of old that if Les Snead thinks he can make a play with a first-round pick, he's going to get it out of his hand quicker than Luke Littler throws darts. Like he knows what to do with those picks when he sees an opportunity to deal one. If there's a player on the other end of it that he thinks he can get, or if there's a bargain elsewhere. I'm wondering, obviously, the shadow of Aaron Donald's retirement kind of is cast large and looms large over this draft. Do they go maybe D lineman? Could CBS be writing it's a Byron Murphy or similar in that slot?
Well, a couple of things to consider here. This is the first round pick the Rams have had since 2016 when they picked Jared Goff. So this is I don't want to say uncharted territory, but they haven't been in this position in a long time. What's the biggest loss that the Rams had last season? Aaron Donald. And I'm looking at Michael Hall Jr., who's a defensive tackle out of Ohio State, huge guy. And it's weird, he's got pretty much the exact specifications that Aaron Donald had. 6'2", 282 pounds. And it's almost too good to be true that guy would be there for the Rams. But I see them taking a defensive tackle, whether it's him or Byron Murphy. Look out for Hall Jr., though. He's a big bruising guy. Physical stature like any DT. But what stands out to me is the physique and the specification is almost identical to Aaron Donald. One other thing to bear in mind is Stafford is 36, and yes, he's got all the weapons, but is that going to be in the back of their mind too at 19? Are they going to be tempted a little bit to play around a little bit? Because there's probably only 1, maybe 2 years left at Stafford. They got to start thinking of quarterback too, coming in there. I mean, they've got. Is
that a trade back and pick up someone in the second round opportunity, or trade back, pick someone up later up in the first? You could probably still get a Bo Nix, you imagine.
Yeah, I don't see them going backwards because they haven't been in the first. I don't see them going out of the first round because they haven't been in the first round in so long. I think they want to max out their first round pick. But you just bear in mind, the back of your mind, that Stafford is getting up there and he's got all those weapons. We know what that Rams offense can be like when they're clicking. Higbee, Puka, Tutu Atwell, Cooper. Maybe there might be a little bit of play in for Penix Jr. Maybe they start thinking ahead of time, but. I think they play it safe and address their one, glaring need, which is replacing Aaron Donald in the front four.
Brian, how do you see it? There's another argument here, and I see the NFL.com one probably ticks this box. It might be where Peter Schrager's head is at, that Stafford is getting up there, as Kieran says. Maybe it's time to start grooming that replacement while he still has time to sit and learn at the feet of the master. On the other hand, you want to squeeze every drop you can out of Matthew Stafford's talent. Maybe one of the things you want to do is shore up that O-line, and maybe Tyler Guyton is your guy.
Well, that's actually absolutely where I was going. I actually would lean towards offensive line. I think they've recognised, having brought Matthew Stafford back last year after the injury, how fruitful the season was. He's still got life left in him, another couple of years. And bearing in mind, they've got 11 picks this year. Just like Kieran has alluded to it, like this is the first year in which Sean McVay's ever had a first round pick as the Rams head coach. It's quite significant in terms of the 11 picks compared to years where they've only had a handful of picks, 3-4. They've hit quite a lot of them, but maybe they don't necessarily have to go defense because of the nature of this year's draft and the fact they've so many picks to play around with. Is there a scenario that they could trade up in the second round and get another defensive player? I think offensive line probably is something that they can consider. Put another player in there, give Matthew Stafford another kind of security blanket and let him swing again and swing in terms of trying to be up there challenging the 49ers to come back and win the division. Great season last year, making the playoffs. They'll be expecting to be back challenging again. I think offensive line, whilst it may not be the snazzy pick, it might be the right pick in the end.
Well, you move to 18 now, where the Bengals pick. Kieran, I might come back to you here and give you first stab at this one. This is another one that really intrigues me because ideally, from a Bengals perspective, all things going to plan, you get Burrow back, you get the right version and the best version of Burrow back for the whole season. You also, of course, are compensating for the lack of Brian Callahan, who's moved on, and that's a big gap. And we saw what happened to the Eagles last year, losing their two coordinators, but probably particularly the absence of Shane Steichen felt keenly in Philadelphia. So we've seen how this one can go. Mock drafts here suggesting CBS have them taking Lad McConkey, wide receiver from Georgia. The Athletic have them taking Byron Murphy, the DT from Texas. We've talked about him already. PFF have them taking John Newton, the lineman from Illinois. And obviously, if we're talking about the shadow of Aaron Donald looming over LA, you got to be thinking about the shadow of DJ Reader looming over Cincinnati. ESPN have them taking Talise Fuanga, the OT from Oregon. NFL.com again have them taking Byron Murphy, the DT from Texas.
Yeah, the thing with the AFC North, it's stacked. Everyone had a winning record last year, and who's going to create that separation? Who's gonna bring the X factor to kind of get above the crowd? With Burrow, we want to keep him upright, right? I mean, you need strong horses right in front. I see them taking, like you said, Fuaga, the tackle from Oregon State. He's 346 pounds, big fast guy. They need him. He can. I mean, he's primarily a right tackle. They may be able to switch him over to left, but he's primarily a right tackle. They need to open up those channels for Zach Moss, but they also got to keep they got to keep Burrow upright. I mean, that's for me their main need right now. Their offense hasn't changed all that much. They're a very productive offense. I saw them live against the Jags in December. Even without Burrow, they were able to spray it around the place. I know they had Joe Mixon in there doing a lot of damage, but still, they've got a lot of weapons out there. They've added Sticky Gesicki, and like I said, they've added Zach Moss. I see them addressing the thing that is kind of glaring, and even when they got to the Super Bowl, the constant knock was he doesn't have a line in front of him. Give him that help. See what he can do when he's healthy with a good line in front of him. So I got Fuaga from Oregon State.
Yeah, they're going to be a fascinating team to watch in terms of the celebrations next year. They got one of the best griddies of the league and the worst griddy in the league, both on the same team. So let's see how that one works out for them. Shane, could you see them maybe going with the lad McConkey? The window's still open here, and looks like they're going to hold on to that trifecta of elite receivers in Higgins, Chase, and Boyd. But they might be thinking of the future as well. They're not going to have them all together next year.
I think it's possible if they wanted to really, I guess, show their ambition to still be an offensively, exciting team. But I think it would be a ridiculous decision to not try and shore up your offensive line. The big thing with the Bengals is it's all right if Joe Burrow can run around and throw 3 picks a game. He'll find a way to get at it, but he needs that extra half a second protection. And as well as that, he needs to not be injured. I mean, all of last season was effectively ruined because he had an injury coming in, and then he ended up missing half the season. Surely at that point, some kind of, the trauma kind of kicks in of the Bengals being like, oh God, we really don't want to lose Joe Burrow again. Let's find a way to protect him. And I think offensive tackle is probably the best place from the start. I know they extended Devin Cochran to sign on a contract extension coming into the offseason. So, it's obvious that it's something that they're going to look at. But I think Taliese Fuaga will be the best pick if he's still there. They really need to make sure that offensive line protects Joe Burrow. They have a pretty good wide receiver core. If there is somebody in the 4th or 5th round that they can maybe coach up later on that they like, that's an option for them as well. But offensive line, in my view, needs to be a priority for Cincinnati.
Brian, we talk about this being a generational, and we shall see with all of this, of course, a generational class for QB talent. We talk about it being deep for wide receiver talent, and probably one of the overlooked parts of the draft is a lot of people saying there's a lot of really good offensive linemen available. I have to say, I'm leaning strongly to the way both Shane and Kieran have outlined it there. Protect Burrow, keep Burrow upright. You won 9 games last year and finished bottom of the AFC North. It's not getting any easier next year. Ravens have Derrick Henry. The Steelers we've talked about have upgraded their quarterback room. The Browns ideally will have Deshaun Watson back. I say ideally, from what we've seen with Deshaun Watson, they might be better off with Jameis Winston, depending on the way things go. Your best chance of keeping that window open and getting back to where you were a couple of years ago is to make sure that Burrow stays unhurt, and maybe Taliese Fuaga or similar is your best way of doing that.
Totally agree on the offensive line. I think again, it's the most fruitful way to go. You got to recognize he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and you want to give him every opportunity to win. And in that case, you find the offensive line. I'll throw another one in there. I know we spoke about him last week. I thought it was very interesting. The Cardinals brought in JC Layden, the offensive line, for a visit, and bearing in mind they're picking with their second pick at 27. That strikes me as a team that are doing their homework now, because they're going to potentially, they've got 11 picks. They could consider getting up into the teens, and ultimately maybe they need to leapfrog the likes of the Bengals. Similar last year with the Steelers, everyone kind of recognized they were going to go offensive line. Is it a scenario where it's kind of given another team within that division is going to go offensive line, and it's about getting ahead of them to get someone like JC or Layden, who, in fairness, has been touted in top 15, but he could slip to that kind of number. That could be an ideal spot for the Bengals.
Right, 17 sees the Jags on the board. The mock drafts are saying, like, it's strong consensus here around Brian Thomas Jr. if he's still available. CBS have them taking Thomas. ESPN have them taking Thomas. The Athletic have Thomas going with this pick, although interestingly, they think the Jags will trade with the Bills and see the Bills take that receiver. See that potentially being a possibility. And PFF have them trading, have the Jags, that is, trading with the Broncos, who they see selecting Laiatu Latu, the edge rusher from UCLA. We've spoken about. NFL.com say the Jags will use this pick on Quinyon Mitchell, the cornerback from Toledo Small School, who's attracting quite a bit of buzz in the last week, seeing his stock rise up the board. Kieran, which way do you see this one going? Wide receiver, you would think, is probably more of a priority for the Jags than it might have been had they done what they were expecting to happen and what a lot of people expected, which was Calvin Ridley getting locked down. That didn't occur. They ended up with Gabe Davis. They're not as strong in that position as they were, and this could be something that they would want to do.
Yeah, they're kind of in that limbo, that midway in the draft. A lot of the stud wide receivers will be gone, and a lot of the stud tackles will probably be gone too. So now they're going to be fishing around in the corner safety market, which is where I think they're going to go. The Jags had the division wrapped up last year to all intents and purposes, and had just a collapse to end all collapses in the month of December. They just shot themselves in the foot, culminating in losing out in Tennessee. They have a lot of issues to address, which they did address in free agency. The line needed a lot of work. They picked up Mitch Morse from Buffalo. They re-signed Brandon Scherf, so that's the O-line taken care of. Did they replace Calvin Ridley? Possibly not, but they still picked up Gabe Davis. They picked up Arik Armstead on the defensive end, and as well as picking up Ronald Darby. I see them picking up Quinyon Mitchell. There's a huge amount I'm in the local market here, and just on local radio, there's a lot of chirp the last 4 or 5 days about this guy out of Toledo. He's a corner. You got to remember they lost Rayshawn Jenkins and they lost Darius Williams to the Rams. They need that. From seeing a lot of the Jags games, their secondary was smoked very regularly last year, and I know that that's something Peterson wants to address. So I have Quinyon Mitchell from Toledo going. Consensus All-American. He was a semifinalist for the Chuck Bednarik Award. All the awards and accolades you would want. Yes, it was a small school in the MAC conference, which is probably ranked 9th or 10th out of the top 10 conferences. But still, he put the numbers up, and he's got that resume enough to attract teams to the first round. Secondary is definitely going to have to be addressed by the Jaguars, so that's where I see them going with Quinyon Mitchell.
The Mid-Atlantic Conference, Shane, not always a hotbed of footballing talent, but a lot of GMs and coaches love picking a guy from a small school with a big character who has that chip on his shoulder, because particularly in a position like cornerback, that's something that can go down very well. You want a guy who feels like he has the world against him and goes to war every week, and maybe that's a pick that makes sense for the Jags. How do you see it?
Yeah, especially when you're coming up against wide receivers that are getting paid hundreds of millions and all that, you kind of want somebody who's quite happy to see themselves as a little plucky underdog. In terms of wide receivers or whether the Jags will pick them, I think it is probably the sexy choice, but not the smart choice. If a wide receiver was still there, I know, like I said, a lot of the mock drafts have Brian Thomas Jr. going over to Jacksonville, but I think Quinyon Mitchell is a good pick at cornerback for the Jaguars, simply because the Jaguars have shown what they can potentially do on offense. They don't need weapons. They need solidity. They need to find a way to finish things. Kieran outlined there that their collapse at the end of last season was just incredible. And a lot of that came from just bad defense. In terms of pass defense and overall defense, they are the 26th best in the league. That's not good enough for a team that has the offensive players that can potentially go as far as the Super Bowl. I know a lot is that defense wins championships, but I think that they really need to find a way to, I guess, get more interceptions, break up passes a bit more, and just not the way, especially that they're coming into, or that they are in a division where they're facing against the Texans and the Colts, who are going to be very big on aerial offense. They need to find a way to counteract that. So I think a cornerback is the smart move. And Quinyon Mitchell is the kind of guy who I think, has the right kind of athleticism, has the right kind of chip on his shoulder, and somebody I think Doug Peterson and the coaching group of the Jaguars can work well with. So that, to me, is the smart pick for Jacksonville.
It's interesting to me, Brian, that the Jags are being highlighted as a team that might trade out of this pick. As Kieran was saying, it is one of those kind of Midland picks where you're probably not going to get a star edge rusher here. You're not going to get a stud wide receiver. You can play clever and box clever with this pick, though, especially if the Jags, who they're kind of one of those funny teams because they don't necessarily have a glaring need that they absolutely need to hit in the first round here. And yet, as both the guys have outlined, they collapsed towards the back end of last season. Their defense showed up really small. They weren't exactly setting the world on fire offensively, but you kind of feel they'll be fine there. Like they have a bit of a groove, and when they're on it, they're on it. What do you think that they're going to do?
I think they're like you touched on there, Connor, and I know Kieran's alluded to. I think they're a real candidate for a trade down. They've got 8 picks. They got 8 picks in the draft, and it's not like you could argue it's a reasonable amount of numbers. Bearing in mind there's some teams there with 6. Kieran has touched on it. There's a lot of work needed, and as you said, it's not clearing holes. It's more about kind of plug and play players in certain positions and kind of stockpiling picks in the sense you're trying to cover various positions. I think there's a real opportunity. We're talking about 11 to 20, but you're in a bit of a quandary between 15 and 20 and what you do. Do you just sit and wait and let your draft board do itself justice and take whatever's available in that particular position, best player off the board, or do you try to be a bit more savvy and strategic and potentially move down? And maybe the Bills are realistically that suitor, or someone like the Cardinals, I suggest, that may come up for that offensive line to get ahead of the Bengals. I think if we're going to see anybody within that particular range move down, I think it's more likely to be the Jags. But I can't disagree with the guys. I mean, the secondary was exposed time and time again in the back end of the season, and Trevor Lawrence was probably playing through injuries and trying to do his utmost. In that game, kind of sums up when he played against the Titans. They were finding ways to get into the end zone towards the end of the game, but couldn't stop the Titans at the other end. That was kind of very kind of evident in the second half of the season. They need to resolve the secondary. So for me, it's secondary if they stay where they are. But ultimately, I have a feeling that come draft night, we're going to see them move down.
Shane, we'll go back to you at 16, where we look at the Seahawks, which will bring us to the end of the first part of our pre-draft preview before we go 15 to 11 in the second part. I'll tell you what the mock drafts are saying about the Seahawks. CBS has them taking Jared Verse, edge rusher from Florida State. The Athletic have them taking Troy Fautanu, interior offensive lineman from Washington. PFF say the Eagles will trade up to this slot to take Terrion Arnold, cornerback from Alabama. ESPN have the Seahawks taken Byron Murphy, defensive tackle from Texas. NFL.com, like the Athletic, have them taken Troy Fautanu, the offensive lineman from Washington. Seahawks again, and we mentioned this in the case of the Rams, where teams can go from boom to bust, draft to draft. Seahawks rode a really strong draft 2 seasons ago, had that, transcendent season from Geno Smith under offensive coordinator Shane Waldron, who will be the OC with the Bears next season. Didn't happen for them last year and didn't go nearly so well. And one of the things I'm kind of surprising that I don't find more pop here among the mock drafts for them addressing the secondary. To me, it was the back seven that was the problem for the Seahawks last season. We expect and we associate the Seahawks with strong defensive play. It's probably what ultimately cost Pete Carroll's job. We have Mike McDonald going in there, and we know what he did with the Ravens. I was surprised that there wasn't more of a attention pace on the possibility of them taking a Kool-Aid McKinstry or Terrion Arnold or whichever your cornerback you fancy. But only PFF have Terrion Arnold going in this slot, and they think the Seahawks are going to trade out of it.
I also think the Seahawks are going to trade out. I think if we're looking at possible picks that could be moved on, we have to remember that the Seahawks are still one of the few teams that are still, as we sit here now, are over the cap hit. They took a big hit on absorbing Jamal Adams' full dead cap hit as well. And you can kind of see that there's a lot of moving parts with the Seahawks. You're not quite sure what they're doing with Geno Smith. I think they're thinking more down the line than they are for this season. I think they're quite or not quite happy, but somewhat resigned to the fact that, the Rams are on an upward curve. They have a very difficult situation dealing with the Cardinals. And of course, the 49ers are one of the best teams of football in their division. So they might be happy just to trade out of this position if it means they've got better draft capital to go for a full rebuild and go all in next season. That said, if they do keep that slot, it's kind of difficult to see where they go because they don't have any, I guess, outstanding needs, but there's probably a few places they could fill a gap. I don't think they'll go for an offensive lineman. I think their O-line was one of the top 10 in the league last year. I don't think that's the route they're going to go. So I think that Byron Murphy, the defensive tackle from Texas, might be an area they consider, especially when you have to take into account that they are playing a lot of strong offenses, particularly when you look at Brock Purdy's San Francisco 49ers, that they want to be able to get at him. If they have a young, hungry defensive tackle who might be able to, I guess, lead a charge a little bit more and put a bit more pressure on offenses, that might be a nice tactical approach for Seattle to take with their first round pick. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if they trade out of this spot.
Kieran, we saw in a prime time slot last year, one of the reasons why Mike McDonald got this job. The Ravens did not lose to the Chiefs because of anything the Ravens did on defense. They probably handled Patrick Mahomes and that Chiefs offense pretty much as well as anyone managed to do last year. I can see him building from that side of the ball before he goes anywhere near the other side of the ball. Maybe it's an edge rusher. I know you're a big fan of Jared Verse if he was available for them. Maybe it's a cornerback or maybe elsewhere. What do you reckon?
Well, again, I mean, they're right there in the middle, 9-8 last year, and they're picking 16. They've 7 picks, so it's what are they going to do with that? Their main needs are quarterback, guard. Like everybody else, they need O-line help. They re-signed Noah Fant to the offense, re-signed Leonard Williams on the front four. Their offense is kind of meh. I mean, you struggle to pick out any superstars in there. I mean, yes, they got DK Metcalf, but who else stands out to you on offense for the Seahawks? Yeah. They need some sort of spark. And that's
I was disappointed in Jackson Smith and Jigba last year. He was the player I thought would be one of the most exciting of the offensive picks last year. We saw a few little flashes of what he could do, but nothing like where you thought he might get to.
Highly touted. It took him a long time to adjust to the league. Towards the end, he started to show some flashes. But the offense, that's why I have them picking Brock Bowers from Georgia, tight end. They need a spark. They need somebody who's got energy. I'm not saying a grunt-like character, but somebody who's physically imposing and is your de facto strong wide receiver / tight end out there to take the workload off of DK Metcalf. 6'3", 243. All he does is win. I mean, with Georgia, just a phenomenon. They were spraying the ball all over the place. He was picking the ball out of the air for fun. I think he's going to be a huge star in the league. Doesn't look like a football player. If you've seen pictures of him, very unassuming. Almost looks like a businessman. But he's going to be a problem for a lot of defenses in the league. I think he's going to be a superstar. I really do. And I see Seattle taking him.
He's and we'll get to him. I think he's a really interesting player as well. I have to say, and I wondered after last year when everybody kind of laughed at the Lions taking Sam Laporta, and that worked out so well for them. Would tight ends get more attention this year? And he seemed to be the prototype of a guy who, like, he was their number one target. Like, as you say, he can do it all. He's essentially a wide receiver in tight ends clothing, and yet there's probably a lot of teams overlooking him. I think they may come to regret that if he does fall. I fancy someone else picking up a bargain here. Brian, Seahawks at 16. As the lads have been saying, and Shane made an important point there. One of the prisms through which you have to view this is your divisional situation. They're in a pretty tough spot, and they're not necessarily going to go in this draft from where they were last year to taking it to the Rams and the 49ers, particularly with the QB situation hanging over them, if not this season, in the next season or two. Gino, fantastic the year before last, not so much last season, and maybe that race is run. But there are other areas that they could tweak to put themselves back closer to the stern competition they have in the West.
Yeah, look, you could argue there's nothing outlandish in what's standing out as a need. I think they'll give Gino another opportunity and try get a production season out of him, and that's why I think they go offensive line. There's a lot of reasons why I think this makes sense. Troy Fantanu, is that how we pronounce the surname? Fantanu coming in from Washington. Well, the new offensive coordinator is from Washington. He was the Washington offensive coordinator. The offensive line coach that's come in, Scott Hoff, is also coming in from Washington. So essentially, he's got two guys he's worked for previously, and he's coming into the draft. It just makes so much sense that they would go and draft him. They know the aspects of his game. They know how they could fit him into a system. They're obviously going to be working over the course of the last few months with McDonald and what they want to do from an offensive line standpoint and an offensive scheming standpoint. It just makes so much sense that they can bring in a guy they've been working with over the course of the last few years. I'd imagine it's an easy transition. So whilst there's other players in play here, I think it's the pick that people will settle on and probably see it as a good pick in the long term, as more so than the snazzier pick. But for me, offensive line.
All right, thanks for that, Brian. And that indeed brings us to the end of the first part of this pre-draft preview. All right, let's get to the second segment of our pre-draft preview, where we're looking at the teams picking from 15th to 11th place in the first round of the 2024 draft, which takes place in Detroit, opening night on Thursday, April 25th. Kieran, the Colts selecting at 15. I'll tell you what the mock drafts are telling us, or the latest mock draft at least. CBS have them taking Brock Bowers, tight end from Georgia. The Athletic have them taking Quinion Mitchell, cornerback from Toledo. PFF also have them selecting Quinion Mitchell. ESPN have them taking Terrion Arnold, cornerback from Alabama. NFL.com, that was Peter Schrager who did that mock draft, have the Bears trading back and using that pick to select J.C. Latham, the offensive tackle from Alabama. So a little bit of, an argument for them picking in the secondary here is what's coming across from these mock drafts. Brock Bowers is a player we know you love, and I'm sure if he fell to them at 15, they would absolutely snap him up. But is that the way it's going to go?
No, I see. Again, Colts 9-8 just missed the playoffs. They, in spite of themselves, they got into the race and they almost, stumbled over the line alongside, with Jacksonville in there. Brought in Joe Flacco, brought back Michael Pittman. Again, like the Seahawks, who can you think of on offense? I know they're bringing Richardson back, but they're going to need somebody out there catching the ball for Richardson. He can't do it all with his legs. I have them picking Troy Franklin as a wide receiver from Oregon, 6'2", 180, almost like your slot kind of slot receiver type. He's fast as lightning. Had a great 2023 with Oregon. Bo Nix throwing the ball to him for fun. Taylor is going to need help too, so they're going to have to throw the ball a lot more to take the pressure off of him. So I know they need secondary help. That's pretty much half the league right now. But I see them going wide receiver.
Brian, what way do you see the Colts shaping up on this one? Having Anthony Richardson back for a full season, if that works out, and we hope it does, would be a big boost based on what we saw from him before he got injured. I mean, they didn't do a bad job with Gardner Minshew in last year. As Kieran said, they had just ended up missing out in the playoffs, which has the unfortunate side effect for them that they're picking at 15.
Yeah, I'm surprised at that pick from Kieran. I think a lot of people suggest that's a bit of a reach, but there's always bound to be a reach of some kind, and we saw it last year with the Lions, and it worked out very well in terms of what people thought after the opening night. I go back to the cornerback situation. I think they need a cornerback, and I think there's too many analysts that you listen to, and they're all on a consistent basis. And you touched on there, Conor. You're going across the board on various different outlets, and they're all suggesting cornerback. When you hear that many people plug in that situation, it seems to me that's the case where they're going. It's a case now of who do they believe to be the most appropriate one? Is it Arnold? Is it Deshaun? Or is it Mitchell? Ultimately, it'll be the decision made, but I think it is the secondary. I think that's where they're leaning. And I think when you see so many mock drafts, and you touched on tonight, and you're giving all the different players, when you see the same consistent message, usually gives you kind of an indication what's going to happen.
No, we remember well how the consistency was that Bryce Young was the number one quarterback available in the draft last year, and look how well that worked out for the Carolina Panthers. Everyone can be wrong as well. That's the beauty of the draft. Shane, Colts at 15. What's your take?
I understand, I guess, the temptation to go for a tight end or a wide receiver, but I think this Colts need defense when it comes to their top picks. And I think they've got two options: either find a way to trade up to get Dallas Turner, maybe if a couple of picks up, but I don't know if they necessarily have the trade capital or want to trade the draft capital in the next couple of seasons to do that, or to find a cornerback to allude on what Brian was saying. Either Terrion Arnold or Quinion Mitchell was kind of that you outlined there, or Cooper DeJean. I think is the kind of person who might kind of fit into the zone system that Indianapolis liked to I guess, roll out. So to me, that's what is the smart decision. But again, it's like you were alluding to here. It's a difficult situation when you're sitting here to 15 as to whether trading up to maybe find that one player that you think can really make the difference is worth it. And I think when you look at some of the edge players, like as I alluded to earlier, Dallas Turner, Indy might find that I guess trying to, might as well going for the guy you want rather than going 3 or 4 picks lower might be worth trading something in next year, or maybe somebody who's already on their roster. So I think it's worth keeping an eye on draft night. But if they're sticking at 15, I think a cornerback is the way to go.
We got 14, 13, and 12 here. I'm looking at Saints, Raiders, and Broncos in the next 3 picks. And these are 3 teams that I don't know where you even start if you're the general manager. It would give me a stroke to even think about how you start addressing these rosters, Kieran. I might come to you first on the Saints, who sneakily are one of the worst teams in football. I think if you're mired where you are in that division and you can't get past the teams in front of you, you have an awful lot of work to do. The mock draft here saying CBS have them taking Olu Fashanu, offensive tackle from Penn State. Athletic also have them taking Olu Fashanu, as indeed do ESPN. PFF have them trading this pick to the Jags, and they see the Jags taking Cooper DeJean, who Shane has just mentioned, and NFL.com has them taking Talise Fuanga, an offensive tackle we've talked about from Oregon. Again, Kieran, I don't even know where you start with the Saints and what the most glaring area of need is among many is their roster. A, ages, and B, they enter the ninth circle of salary cap hell, given the financial engineering that would put Lehman Brothers to shame.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things that, they've got 9 picks this year. I think Derek Carr has still got the boos ringing in his ear from the Mercedes-Benz Dome. It seems like, they know quarterback is something they're going to have to address very soon, because if they start off shaky again and Carr starts getting the boos, that's when the confidence is going to start getting shook. Their offense is pretty solid. I mean, Alvin Kamara, Jamal Williams running the ball. They picked up Chase Young. Chris Olave is a beast out there too. I mean, but what do they need help with? Again, they need help on the line. I see them taking Joe Alt for Notre Dame. He's just, certain people are just destined for the NFL. His dad played, Jack Alt played for the Chiefs. His entire family is just athletes. He's a Minnesota boy. I mean, they're corn-fed country boys. They just raise him as O-tackles up there. And I see him going to the Saints to give Derek Carr some sort of help in either the run game or just staying upright, because it's going to be it may get late early for Carr come October.
Shane, the Saints have the carrot, quote unquote, of a home Super Bowl if they can get things together this season. I don't think any of us thinks that will happen, but it starts with a good draft. What should they do?
I guess first thing I should do is probably lose hopes of making this the home Super Bowl this year. But I don't know. I don't want to. I could already be putting a voodoo curse on them too early. I think the consensus, if you actually put into Google, and I was doing my research earlier, what the New Orleans Saints need in.
Is that what the kids are calling it these days? As I was typing in Google earlier, that's what research.
Don't want me to go to the library? I don't know. Not quite sure what I'll find there in the Cardinal.
You ring your well-placed NFL front office sources, Shane. That's what we expect.
But anyway, the first thing that comes up is in all caps offensive line, which I'm not quite sure whether that's the best use of their first round pick. I think going for a defensive edge, defensive tackle or cornerback is probably the best way to go. If he's there, Jared Verse, a good Florida State man, is the person I think would go for him, because if Derek Carr and the offense isn't going to be running particularly well, you might as well try to, I guess, set up your team now defensively and look at the offensive rebuild next year, 2 years down the line, and at least get a defensive culture set up now that can keep quiet what is one of, or probably the worst division in the league. I know that the Falcons are trying to improve their stock after the move in for Kirk Cousins, but I think defensive is the way to go for the Saints this year in terms of their top picks. I know some mock drafts around New Orleans have them picking wide receivers in the first 2 rounds. I think cornerback or defensive edge, again, kind of depends on who's there. If Quinton Mitchell or Terrion Arnold is there and they like the look of him, fair enough. But if they can get him, Jared Verse, edge from Florida State, that's the guy.
Brian, there were reasons to be cheerful about the Saints this time last year. And, there's a reason why people say at the same time that NFL stands for not for long. 1 year a team is near its peak and looks talent rich. Another year and another couple of miles on the clock, and suddenly players, even of the caliber of Cam and some of the other guys they have, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, they're now 34, 35. They're getting on, and things could come apart very quickly if they're not careful. How do they address that in the draft?
That's a difficult one, is because they do need some serious help on defense. In saying that, there was quite a lot of games last year where they didn't play well offensively and they got out of games with wins because their defense played quite well. So yeah, it's an aging team. We kind of touched on last year when, in particular, me probably was a bit more assertive and aggressive on how I felt they'd be last year. I thought they'd win the division. I even suggested they might go deep into the playoffs, but the Derek Carr experience hasn't worked so far. And Kieran's suggesting the Boo Boys, and once they do need work on defense, I'm going to actually go Wildcat. I think Brock Bowers might potentially fall to 14, and then in that instance they go best player available. And with the kind of thought process to give Derek Carr as many opportunities and as many weapons And I know that means a lot of things have to take place in the top 10, like a Roman Dunze potentially falling to the Jets at 10, and they'd select him immediately as opposed to taking the tight end. That's not against the realms of possibility. And then you look at the scenario of teams thereafter. What do we do? If he doesn't go at 10, Brock Bowers, I think he could fall to the Saints at 14. And in that instance, I think they just accept best player available, another weapon for Derek Carr. Because people are suggesting once he's a tight end, arguably he's a dual threat. He could be wide receiver. And like, we think of the Saints and we think of Jimmy Graham over the years. I know he's back there now, but he's getting on in age and he's that type of player. He could go in and be really aggressive there and do a good job. So Brock Bowers for me, a bit of a wild card.
Jeez, Jimmy Graham's like Fungi the Dolphin at this stage. I'm pretty sure it's not still the same. Jimmy Graham, he's been around forever.
But he caught a few touchdowns last year because it fit what they're trying to do in the red zone. This is like Brock Bowers could be a efficient type of player in the red zone. I think it's not against the realms of possibility that the Saints don't do anything. The trend, kind of as you touched on there with salary cap hell and all the rest, it wouldn't surprise me if they just said, you know what, screw it, we'll go Brock Bowers and we'll give Derek Carr another opportunity.
Raiders, the team that Derek Carr left, of course, Kieran, a team that probably the best move they made last year was to get rid of Josh out of the building. Josh McDaniel gone, and the mood immediately lifted. Antonio Pierce was the interim head coach. Now the head coach confirmed. A move that can go either way, and there are not that many precedents in NFL history, funnily enough, for a guy who takes on the interim head coach role and then gets promoted. It doesn't always work out. Now it's interesting to hear guys like Davante Adams stumping for him, and Adams coming up big for Pierce, saying, you know, this is a guy that a lot of people have been saying would want his way out of Vegas, saying, no, this is my guy, I want to stay here, this is the team I want to be with, which is a big statement to make when you're going to be catching balls from either Gardner Minshew or Jimmy G next season if they can get it to you. The mock drafts are saying CBS have them taking Troy Fautanu on the offensive line. The Athletic have them taking Terrion Arnold, Alabama cornerback. PFF also have them taking Troy Fautanu from Washington. ESPN have them taking Quinion Mitchell, cornerback from Toledo. And the NFL.com have them taking Olu Fashanu, the offensive tackle from Penn State. We've already talked about it in a couple of spots here. There's a lot of areas of need for the Raiders. They went big, interestingly, in free agency for Christian Wilkins from the Dolphins, shore up the interior of the defensive line. Defense, as we know, probably has a lot of talent and was less than the sum of the parts last year. So you're not necessarily thinking they need major surgery there. Secondary, obviously, an area of need, and that's called out in these mock drafts. Equally, people can see them going on that offensive line and trying to give Gardner or whoever's in there, Aidan O'Connell or whoever it's going to be, a shot.
Yeah, I mean that's going to be the big struggle for the Raiders, keeping the momentum from last year going. They were unlucky to miss the playoffs. It was a fun kind of ride, and it was a great story in the NFL. But those stories don't tend to last all that long. And if he doesn't start producing, Pierce, if he's got a rough start, then he's going to start hearing about it real quick. They've got a quarterback issue, like we all know. I mean, Aidan O'Connell, he may be the starter for a couple of weeks, but they're going to go to Minshew by October, and they're going to give him the keys and let him see what he can do, to throwing it to Davante Adams. Questions. I mean, they lost Hunter Renfrow, a nice little slot receiver. They picked up Madison, the running back. He's going to be big for him. There's not a lot of depth in this team, and when there's not a lot of depth, what do you look to shore up first? And that's the O-line. And I see them going Fashanu from Penn State. He's going to be a big pickup for them. That they need a lot of things. They need corner, they need linebacker help too, but I see them taking Olu Fashanu from Penn State.
Is it a splash with Fash for you, Brian, or do you see them going elsewhere?
Michael Penix Jr. That's the one. There's another one. I'm giving you the wild cards towards the back end of this show tonight, Connor. I mean, he's a player that's been touted potentially is going in the first round. Again, some suggest he should be a second round pick because of the nature of his injuries. But again, having spoke to various other people, people have a very different opinion on him. Some people refer back to that particular tape against Texas where he threw for 430 yards and 2 touchdowns. And at the time, Kieran was doing the college podcast, and we reflected on maybe he is first round talent. He's the type of player for me that would suit what the Raiders are trying to do at the moment, that they can see how it plays out in terms of giving O'Connell another opportunity. There's obviously the Gardner Minshew experience. If Gardner Minshew doesn't work out, then ultimately you go to your first round pick quarterback. But it probably is a bit of a a bit of a reach right now from where he is compared to the other quarterbacks, but I think they need to resolve this quarterback situation in the long run. Gardner Minshew is not the answer. Like, you get 3 or 4 great games out, and what we saw towards the end of the season, that was the culture threatening to win the division, just couldn't get it over the line in certain games. Serviceable quarterback, not the long-term solution. They need to find a solution. They need to find it soon. So I think they go out on a limb and go Michael Penix Jr.
What do you think, Shane? A lot of people are actually calling it as the Raiders making a move for quarterback in the first round. None of these mock drafts, funnily enough, I have managed to pick the 5 that didn't see that happening in the first round. But Brian has rightly called it out as clearly an area of need and something that they might well do, and something that could be fun to watch on draft night.
Yes, screw you, Brian. I was hoping to come up with my thunder and be like, oh, they're gonna go for a quarterback. And look, I think it's a weird kind of race between the Broncos and the Raiders to sitting here at 12 and 13 as to whether one of those teams will jump and go for the quarterback option. I think the reason why the mock drafts are picking offensive linemen and cornerbacks is because they're using their brains, and that doesn't always happen in some of these teams. And I think again, the Raiders quarterback situation is quite clear. It's not good. It's not something they can build in the long term, and that's something against the talents of Gardner Minshew or Aidan O'Connell. But I don't think they can really rely on them to I guess build a future. You can bring in Michael Penix Jr. He can sit in behind. He can learn for a year. He doesn't need to be started straight away. Patrick Mahomes wasn't a starter straight away, and that's the guy that they're trying to beat. You know, he can sit in behind and find a way to get used to whatever the system, or like get used to life in the NFL. It's unusual that we're talking about Michael Penix being picked so high in the draft, considering for the longest time he was seen as the quarterback you pick if you were looking for one in the second round. But I think that if the Broncos won't do it, and I don't think the Broncos will, the Raiders are the type of team that would jump on Penix for a quarterback. Just say all in. You know, we're cashing in our chips here. We're going to try and build something and go for talent. Again, it might not be the smartest thing to do, but their defense is sort of the median in the league, as is their sacks allowed statistic. You know, they're not that bad. They're not great, but they're not awful. So they don't need immediate fixing. The quarterback situation needs immediate fixing, or at least they need to look like that they're really thinking about sort of building something for the future after the failure that was the Josh McDaniels experiment. So I think Michael Penix Jr. is an idea which is a little bit wacky, but maybe one that could work in Las Vegas. Not one that will work in Denver. I know some people are saying that that's somewhere that Denver might go, but if anyone's going to go for it, it's going to be Las Vegas.
Well, I'm going to go straight to you for the 12th pick, Brian, because we come to the Broncos, who sit in the same division, and as Shane was saying, are all staring up at Patrick Mahomes, whatever they do. And, you know, I know teams can do crazy things in one year. We saw the Texans do it last year, but they had 2 picks in the first 5 to do it with, and they managed to pick both the offensive and defensive rookies of the year in CJ Stroud and Will Anderson, which kind of helps. If you have Penix off the board by this stage going to the Raiders, what do you have the Broncos doing? Let me give you the mock drafts first to
because the precarious one, very precarious one. 12.
CBS saying Laiatu Latu, edge rusher UCLA. The Athletic saying Talise Fuanga from Oregon, the offensive lineman. PFF have them trading out this to the Saints, who they see picking Talise Fuanga. ESPN have them taking Brock Bowers from Georgia, and NFL.com also, like CBS, have them taking Laiatu Latu, the edge rusher.
I don't think they're going to get a quarterback. Like, just to double down with Shane there, like, you look at the fit, and I think it makes more sense for the Raiders to go Michael Penix Jr. I don't think it makes any sense for the Broncos to go. I think the Broncos have been burnt now, obviously, because of the Russell Wilson situation. I don't think they will look at it as we're in a comfortable position there where the fans will accept the developing quarterback coming in, where I think the Raiders fans will be a bit less, kind of less of their expectation around what a quarterback will do if they're selected. Where the Broncos are ultimately thinking it's a JJ McCarthy type scenario that if we could get him at 12, he would essentially be the starting quarterback come September. They'll say all the right things around training camp. He's got to win the position, but ultimately come week 1. But ultimately, I don't think JJ McCarthy's going to be there at 12. I think he's going to go in the top 10. Like Colin obviously is not here. He suggested the only way they're getting up to that level, top 6 is ultimately put Patrick Surtain into a trade, and maybe that comes off. We obviously just outland this trade like the AJ Brown a couple of years ago, going to the Titans. Maybe that comes off on the night itself. But if they are to stay at 12, edge rusher, and like everybody's suggesting that Dallas Turner is a given to go number 1. We were on the Daniel Jeremiah piece yesterday. He's going to suggest it's not a foregone conclusion. He's the first defensive player off the board. Maybe he drops to 12. and they take him, but ultimately I do think they'll lean defense if the quarterback is not there. And for me, that would be an edge rusher. Who it is, obviously, depending on who they favor and who ultimately is there available to them at 12.
Kieran, it could well be a quarterback, as Brian was saying, if one is available. If not, what do they do?
Well, I think it has to be quarterback for the Broncos. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the movie Home Team, where he goes back to coach his son's middle school team. I mean, he'll be there. He'll be back there next year if they don't get a quarterback and if they finish with a losing record again. Penix is intriguing because I think Penix will fall to 12. And the reason I say that is because there's two things in play. He did his ACL twice, which is scaring a lot of teams away from him. He's a pocket passer. He's someone that Peyton can mold. But on the flip side, they've got to get somebody that can throw the ball, but it's competent. And I think he's going to fall to 12. And if he doesn't, I think that's when it's panic stations for the Broncos. That's when it's sweaty palms. I mean, if all those quarterbacks or most of them start disappearing by 3 or 4, that's when they start trading up. They've got to, because they're not going to get another chance. There's not a lot in the later rounds. I mean, I know we always see starting quarterbacks come from the 3rd, 4th, and 5th round, but he can't take the chance on that. He's got a quarterback that excelled at college, that got to the national championship game, that's got all the attributes to be a starter in the NFL. If it gets to the stage where where it gets to that, and the quarterbacks are rapidly disappearing, they're going to push the panic button and give it up. The only thing is they don't have a 2nd round pick. Now they've got 8 picks, but they have a bunch of 3rds, so they're going to have to start like Brian said. They're going to have to give up Surtain. He's definitely going to be on the board, and they might have to throw a couple other people in, maybe a safety or a lineman or something like that. But it's got to be quarterback for the Broncos.
Shane, as the lads are saying, sorry.
Sorry, just dominate it, because one quick final point on the Broncos from me. Whilst we were literally discussing the Broncos, ESPN put a report out, and I imagine it's come from today's press conference with their GM, George Payton. He said he's comfortable with 8 quarterbacks in this draft. If that's the case, that's a lot to be putting out there. But again, I suppose it's a lot of moving parts of how we should navigate the storylines. But yeah, he's suggesting 8 quarterbacks are on their board and they're comfortable with all of them.
Is that his 8 picks? Is it all every
quarterbacks?
A quarterback. One of them will be throwing enough darts at the dartboard. It'll be grand.
Shane, Sean Payton, if there's one guy coaching here who thinks he can take the 8th quarterback selected off this board and turn him into the next Drew Brees, it is Sean Payton. He didn't come to Denver to take a year to wait for a quarterback. You would feel that they're going to do that.
Yeah, and Kieran made a great point about the fact that the Broncos don't have a 2nd round pick. So I mean, they're left with 3 options for quarterback, really. Find a way to trade up to get JJ, stick at 12 and get Michael Penix, or find a way to maybe trade your 3 3rd round picks for a 2nd rounder and get Bo Nix that way. I don't know which way they're leaning, because I'm still not quite sure that they want to give up what they need to give up to move up to get JJ McCarthy, or whether even people feel that JJ McCarthy is worth it because of all of the negative press or the negative commentary around how much we've actually seen of JJ McCarthy playing at Michigan. So when you consider that there are a lot of talented players on Denver, which really they would be smart to keep. Finding a way to get Bo Nix in at the top of the 2nd round by trading other picks is probably the smartest way to go. And in that case, I'd probably be looking at Brock Bowers as somebody who is an offensive weapon, has worked at a winning program in Georgia, is probably the kind of guy that Sean Payton can work well with, but also adds that right mixture of pass protection and being somebody who can be an offensive weapon for whoever the quarterback is in Denver, and God knows who that is. I think, taking a tight end in the 1st round and trying to find some way to trade up to the top of the 2nd round to get Bo Nix is probably the smartest way for Denver to act right now, because they just haven't got enough capital to want to be a winning team, but also be trying to move up for JJ McCarthy. And I don't think that JJ McCarthy is worth what Denver has to give up for him.
Brian, I'm going to come to you first on the final pick of the of this section of our pre-draft preview, because we have the Vikings selecting at 11. You've been throwing out the wild cards all night. Now, a wild card for the Vikings would actually be to use this pick. Of the mock drafts we've looked at, and I'll cut to the chase here, only one, and that's NFL, at the NFL.com, actually have the Vikings using this pick, and they have them selecting Terrion Arnold, cornerback from Alabama. No surprises that elsewhere everybody sees them trading out of this pick to trade up and go for a quarterback. What do you reckon?
It's probably ideal that we do finish on this one, Connor, because last week when we were doing the previous one, which was 21 up to 32, and we spoke about the Vikings at 23, and realistically how we didn't believe they would be there. So we should be really talking about suggesting which team is going to be at 11 as opposed to discussing the Vikings if they are to be there at 11. I think ultimately if it is, it's staggering to think that to be there at 11. It's just so many conversations, suggestions they're not going to be there. It's kind of it's bizarre that we even have to suppose work on the base they are going to be there at 11. If they're there at 11, I think they go defense. I think secondary. I think that kind of brings into the conversation we had earlier around with the Colts and with the Jags, and in particular on the Jags, if they are comfortable taking the cornerback, which one is there? Because I imagine that's where the cornerbacks will start to go off the board at 11, assuming it's the Vikings. But ultimately, I think come next week we'll be hearing the ding ding music, and it'll be the Vikings making a fast start to the draft and getting themselves up to the top 5, potentially top 6. Joe Shane today suggested some teams are ringing the Giants looking for 6. If the Giants want to move down and take the 11 and 23, maybe that's a more prudent move for the Giants. I think ultimately someone will recognise having the 11th pick and having the 22 pick is a great opportunity. I throw in the Cards there. If the Cards, bear in mind the Cards have a late first round pick as well. The Cards could move from 4 to 11 and have 11, 23 and 27 and do a lot to get that team back up and running very quickly. Yeah, to finally answer your question, Connor. Defense, but realistically, I don't think they're going to be there.
Shane, as Brian quite rightly says, it's probably more likely that it'll be the Chargers or someone else taking this 11th pick rather than the Vikings. So we could be looking at, according to the mock drafts, the Chargers taking Talisi Fawanga, JC Latham, the Athletic has them taken, Brock Bowers, the PFF has them taken, ESPN also has them taken, JC Latham incidentally, but probably going to be a signal caller for the Vikings once they package up their 2 first-round picks, as is widely expected.
I think it's quite clear that if the Vikings don't find some way to trade this for a 4th or 5th overall, that they have the negotiation skills of a duck, and it like there's no way they're sitting on this and using it. And I think the Cardinals are in prime position for a reason that Brian outlined earlier. The Cardinals are coming in with Kyler Murray. If they can find a way to have 3 first overall picks plus whatever else the Vikings are going to give them to get that 4th overall pick, so the Vikings will presumably get JJ McCarthy. That's a great move for the Cardinals. And then the Cardinals, I think, in 11 would end up picking a wide receiver. They might find a way to nick Brian Thomas Jr. or Rome Odunze, depending on who's kind of left by the time we get to 11. But, I don't know if there's much point in even trying to predict what the Vikings would do with this pick if they kept it, because it's remarkably unlikely that they do, because it just doesn't make sense considering their quite apparent need at quarterback and the fact that they have the capital and the cap space to make that move and to entice the Chargers, Cardinals, or maybe even the Giants into moving down so they can pick 4, 5, or 6. So, look, I'm not quite sure who the Vikings would pick if they did stick. They'd probably look for somebody on the offensive line, but I wouldn't read too much into it. I think this is a pick for either the Cardinals, Chargers, or Giants. Probably the Cardinals being the most likely of those 3.
I'm looking at the Vikings next year, Kieran, and thinking if they do get the right guy, and firstly, this is not the worst situation in the world for a quarterback to find themselves in. Like the Vikings are one of those sneaky teams that, like, before Kirk Cousins got injured, were absolutely flying. There's no shortage of weapons there. You've got Justin Jefferson, who is Justin Jefferson. They brought in Aaron Jones, which I think was a great move. I'm not sure that the Packers may live to regret taking Josh Jacobs and letting him walk out of the building, durability issues notwithstanding. They had Brian Flores doing, just wreaking chaos with very little to work with on the defensive side of the ball. Really impressive job he did. And yet they still might find themselves scrapping for bottom place in the NFC North, depending on how things work out. And yet one of the things that, was a really cool storyline last year was that first game when Josh Dobbs ended up playing. Josh Dobbs, shout out to Josh Dobbs, Brian, who we met in Vegas. I think we mentioned that for the 567th time in the Cosmopolitan. But watching the way O'Connell eased Josh Dobbs into what was such a stressful spot, like he literally didn't know the names of half of his teammates. He'd only just arrived in the building on the Thursday, and he's having to jump onto the field. And Kevin O'Connell explaining the plays to him, because he'd no time to learn the playbook, explaining the plays to him, and he goes out and wins the game for the Vikings. This is an extremely talented coach, and I'm kind of excited to see what he does with whoever he takes in the draft. I can see them being quite an interesting watch next year.
Well, this is what I predict happening about 8:45 on Thursday night. The Vikings have moved up to number 3. I don't know if you saw the news today about the Pats, the GM saying that he's open to the 3rd pick. I think everyone's ears in the NFL just suddenly pricked up and went, "Oh, okay, so business is open, huh?" So I think I can see the Vikings giving everything up. That. Here's the other factor involved in this is they don't have a second or third round pick, which hamstrings them a little bit. The Vikings are going to find a way to parlay that 11 pick, moving all the way up to 3, to take JJ McCarthy.
But this is my point: is they're not a rebuilding team. They can win.
Can I just throw another thing into the mix there, Connor? And I think it's Monday or Tuesday. The NFL are going to make a final decision on the investigation around the Falcons having the offline conversation with Kirk Cousins and how that deal was done so quickly. Obviously, the Vikings have brought it to the league's attention. And it's been suggested that if it was the case, there could be a flip-flop between 8 and 11, which would then in turn would have the Vikings up to 8, which make it a lot more plausible that they could even get up as far as 2 or 3 if they were to be given the 8th pick and essentially the 23rd pick away as well. So just another one to throw in there, because it's a wordy conversation right now.
Just another one to annoy me: the idea of the Patriots trading down from the 3rd overall. We've lasted this long and they haven't done it. I was hoping that they would at least hang on for one more week, but no. The Vikings, of course, I think like Kieran alluded to, it can become a very enticing deal and something that the Vikings have the great impetus to go and at least attempt.
Well, we will leave it there and hold all those thoughts for when we discuss the top 10 next week. We've done 20-11, and we did 32-21 last week. You can check that one out wherever you get your podcasts. And please do remember to like or subscribe to the Irish NFL Show. Leave a review if you liked what you heard. The more stars we get and the more reviews we get, the easier it is for others to find us and join the Irish NFL Show community. Great to talk to you as always. We'll see you very soon.